Say hello to my little friend. Venom? What are you doing here? Awkward. Okay, say hello to my other little friend. Oh, Buzz Lightyear? What are you doing here? Well then, say hello to my little friend. Oh, Harry Potter? What are these Funko Pop toys doing here? They have no relation to me. They're just my little Funko Pop toys, but they're not my little friends. I'm trying to look for another little friend. Can you guys help me spot it right now? It would be great. Actually, hold on for a second. Here we go. Say hello to my little friend, Scarface. Scarface is a 1983 gangster film directed by Brian De Palma, and it is a remake of the original 1932 film that is also titled Scarface. So this movie stars Al Pacino as Tony Montana. So this movie is about Al Pacino as Tony Montana, and Tony Montana is this Cuban refugee that decides to go to Florida to escape Fidel Castro's regime. So when he goes to Florida, he's trying to find his way through until he gets a job in the drug business. And once he gets into dealing with cocaine and other drugs, he begins to build his own empire of dealing with, other gangsters, other members, and even, making a profit all these drugs. So once he gets into business, he becomes this humongous kingpin. But when he becomes the boss of all these people, his happiness begins to disappear. He is no longer the man he used to be in the first part of the movie. And once he becomes the kingpin, he becomes the ultimate enemy, or the public enemy, to the public. If there is a film that is almost 100% perfection, it has to be Scarface, because this is probably one of the best gangster films I have ever seen, because almost everything works in Scarface, from the writing, the cinematography, the acting, the action. Almost everything works, and especially with the direction of Brian De Palma. And realizing that this movie is by Brian De Palma, I was very amazed by how he made this craft of Scarface, how he was able to make this environment of the drug business come to life in this film. And it's very well done, and having Brian De Palma having this type of vision, making this type of movie, just really impressed me about what he was trying to aim for in relation to making this film. The best thing about this movie is Al Pacino as Tony Montana, because this movie is his movie. He has the world upon him in Scarface. When he becomes Tony Montana on screen, Al Pacino just disappears. He eventually becomes Tony Montana. He's able to characterize him, and the way he acts, he does a tremendous job of, getting the accent right, getting his characterizations, his mannerisms correct. And the thing about Tony Montana is that he's a very interesting character. He is someone that rises to power. He didn't have a very easy way through. And when he begins to build a new type of character throughout the entire movie, from the first act to the third act, you're able to really understand his point of view. And by the time he becomes a big kingpin throughout the climax, or the middle part of the movie, he becomes a very different type of person. He's no longer the type of person you see from the first part of the film, and even by the time the movie ends, he is completely different. He becomes this type of person who is kind of an anti-hero. He becomes a monster, and because of how much power he has grasped, that's who he becomes, and Pacino really dominates the role of Tony Montana. I must also talk about the pacing of this movie, because Scarface has probably the best pacing I have ever seen put on film. Let me tell you guys, this movie is super long. It's 2 hours and 50 minutes, and it's really long for people to kind of tolerate that time. But Scarface is one of those movies that has a very long runtime, and when you watch it, you feel as if only an hour passed, when it's actually 2 hours. And it's because this movie has some of the best pacing I have ever seen. And it's because all of these scenes that are structured from point A to point B, they're structured so well and very uniquely, they're able to fall into these conversations and into these scenes. You're able to get involved with every single scenario that is featured in Scarface. And when you watch these scenes, each and every scene has a purpose. There's scenes that build characters, or that scenes that build tension. And it's very well done through the direction of Brian De Palma and how he wanted those scenes to be. And by the time that the film elevates into, from rising action to the climax to the falling action, it's just so well structured that you really feel like you're going through a roller coaster ride that is super long, but very well thought of, or thought out to be. The writing of Scarface is also very great. when you listen to these conversations and the dialogue scenes, these dialogue scenes do not feel wasted at all. Each and every line matters in Scarface, whether it's talking about Tony Montana, talking about his life, or the drug dealing business. When you hear each and every line, you're able to really dive yourself into each and every sentence that someone says because it means something. And each and every detail just gives you a little hint about the character or what is about to happen. And even the lines that people say, it really does match their personality. And yeah, it does remind me of how Tarantino writes his stories, with all the films like Pulp Fiction. But Scarface back in '83 was one of those films where the dialogue was just great. I could listen to it all day. It's got great lines. In fact, there is one scene in the film, probably in the third act, where Al Pacino gives out a tremendous performance, and he gives out a speech about how he's the bad guy and stuff like that. It is a great speech. I'll definitely show some footage of it. But if you watch the movie, you can tell how much Al Pacino did and how much of an awesome job he has done with this film. Scarface also has great set designs. I can go all day about the set designs of this film because the set designs are just perfection, gorgeous, and beautiful. And one of my favorite set designs from this film is probably the mansion of Tony Montana, because this movie uses a great amount of red in the red walls of Tony Montana's mansion. And from an analytical perspective, from my point of view, I believe red represents the amount of bloodshed that Tony Montana has done to all his enemies, and how bloodshed has blinded him from having any type of life that he really wants. And sure, he has made millions of dollars through the drug dealing business, but he has kind of become someone that he is not really meant to be, or he's meant to be, or basically what I'm trying to say is that he has become a little monster. And whenever he's going through all these type of blood and guts, he just doesn't care whose blood he sheds, whether it's his enemies, his friends, betrayal. Stuff like that is the type of things that filmmakers want to see when people use these type of colors for, this type of symbolism. It really works. Scarface is a film that is so great. I can go on and on about praising this movie. However, I am pretty sure that there are going to be some people that might not really like this movie. Because, first of all, this is a very, very brutal film. There is a lot of violence in this film. And when the violence is on screen, it's pretty gruesome, especially for an R-rated movie. And sure, it's rated R, but it's a pretty brutal film, and there's just a lot of violence. And it kind of feels like you're watching a Tarantino film, except this is by De Palma, Brian De Palma. And another thing that Scarface does is that it presents messages about drug business at the time of the early 80s, and how back in those days some of the dealers were Cuban, and some people might not like those things being presented in film, which I completely understand, and some people might find that a little, sensitive to even discuss about in film. But Scarface is that type of movie that is kind of subjective because of how film is very subjective. It may please people, it may not please people, but nevertheless, it is still a film that movie lovers should still see and analyze. If filmmakers want to learn about how to make a really long movie with great pacing, great story structure, great plot structure, great rising action, climax, falling action, great set designs, great everything, then I highly recommend Scarface, because Scarface absolutely deserves a 10 out of 10. Now, I said in my Instagram story that I'm having a Tarantino week, and Scarface may not be a Tarantino film, but I believe Quentin Tarantino was inspired by some of the things from Scarface, especially the sets with, the red all over. It kind of reminded me of some of the sets from Inglourious Basterds, and especially for the fact that Al Pacino will be in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, so I guess that counts. So, thank you guys for watching. So, yeah, to end this review, I'm just gonna have Tony Montana say hello to my little friend by the end. Thank you, guys!
Say hello to my little friend!